At 3 in the morning, the Rhine looked like liquid iron under a sky burned empty of stars. A dozen soldiers rowed in silence, no lights, no compass, no sound except the creak of oars and the slap of cold water. Every breath came out as fog. Lieutenant Aaron Keaton sat in the lead boat, hand on his rifle, pulse steady only because fear had already burned itself out hours ago. Upstream, a lone flare burst over a ruined city, turning the river silver. For one frozen second, every man stopped paddling. Their orders were clear: no shots, no noise, no mistakes. The flare dropped, hissing into the mist. Somewhere across the water, a dog barked, then nothing. Keaton leaned forward. He thought he saw movement on the far bank, a shape, maybe a shadow. He raised his weapon, finger resting just shy of the trigger. Then he stopped. The silence told him everything. The enemy wasn't waiting. The enemy had already left. The boats grounded in muddy sand. Men leapt out, rifles ready, hearts pounding. No fire, no resistance, no call to arms. Only wind pushing through reeds. They advanced up the slope, expecting an ambush that never came. By the time they reached the tree line, the horizon had begun to pale. Behind them, the river kept flowing, a sound older than the war itself. Keaton turned once, watching the black surface swallow their footprints. No shouts of triumph, no cheers. Just relief tangled with the uneasy thought that something was wrong. "This is too easy," one private whispered. Keaton didn't answer. The truth is, he was thinking the same thing. The line had been crossed, but the real cost hadn't been paid yet. Like, subscribe, and tell me, would you have crossed, knowing silence could mean death? In a small barn near Oppenheim, General Friedrich Albrecht sat on a wooden crate beside a dead radio. The cold had settled deep into his bones, but it wasn't the kind that blankets, it scraped. His aides had vanished hours ago. His division no longer existed, swallowed by the silence from the West Bank. He stared at a map nailed to the wall, red pins marking regiments that no longer answered calls. The river, his supposed shield, had become the enemy. Albrecht clenched his fist, bringing it down hard on the table. The glass lamp toppled. His only light went out. In the dark, his hands shook as he searched for paper. The pencil snapped twice before he forced the words out: "Oppenheim lost before dawn. Blame lies with me." Then one more line under it: "Elise Weber." The name grounded him. The nurse who had argued with him hours earlier, begging to stay behind for the civilians. He had promised her a safe route east. He lied. He always lied, convincing himself it was duty. Outside, a horse neighed weakly in the distance. Inside, the general's breath shortened. He folded the note, slid it into his coat pocket, and stood beneath the loft beam. As he looked up, his lips moved, not in prayer, but apology. When the floorboards creaked under his boots, the sound was final. Across the river, Americans celebrated without knowing they had broken more than a front. They had broken a man who'd been loyal to an empire already turning to dust. Comment below: was honor worth dying for when the war was already lost? 2 weeks before the crossing, the air in Mainz smelled of dust and antiseptic. Nurse Elise Weber wiped her hands on a rag dark with blood that no longer shocked her. The hospital corridors ran with stretchers, not soldiers, families, children, the wreckage of what used to be home. She worked quietly, refusing to look at propaganda plastered above the cots. The war had stopped being about flags long ago. It was about meals, morphine, and keeping small lungs breathing one more night. When the call came from headquarters, she knew it wasn't optional. An officer's driver waited outside. "You're needed at Colonel Albrecht's post," he said, using the wrong rank, the man promoted faster than his men could follow. At the command post, Elise found not a war room, but a ruin of papers and smoke. Albrecht paced between windows, his voice low, his face worn like stone. You will move your patients east tomorrow, he told her, before the river is crossed. His tone wasn't request. It was confession. Outside, she pressed her hands against the wall to steady herself. The screams from the rail yard echoed faintly, soldiers boarding trains to nowhere. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang under air raid sirens. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, not much longer. But even then, she didn't believe it. The war wasn't finished with her. It had just started to notice her. If you were Elise, could you obey those orders, or would you have stayed? In a command tent near the Saar River, tempers snapped like dry twigs. Patton wanted to move, but the message from Eisenhower's HQ was short: wait for the British. Patton paced, muttering curses under his breath. His staff watched in silence as maps were scattered like shrapnel. Lieutenant Keaton, standing near the doorway, saw the general strike a fist against the table and hiss, "The moment we wait is the moment we lose." That night, word spread quietly across camp. A new list of assignments circulated, unofficial, and signed. Keaton's name appeared beside a single line: Rhine Reconnaissance, Oppenheim Sector. He read it 3 times, then folded it into his jacket. No insignia, no authorization, no guarantee of anything but ruin if caught. Still, he prepared his men anyway. Around midnight, rain started falling, steady, cold. A few soldiers asked if this was one of Patton's wild impulses. Keaton only said, "If the river's open, we move." Nobody argued. Some wrote letters they wouldn't mail. As the camp lamps dimmed, Keaton stood alone by the trucks. He knew disobedience in wartime carried only 2 outcomes: victory or court-martial. Sometimes both at once. Would you have trusted a general who gambled everything on silence? Like and subscribe if you think courage means knowing when not to wait. In the fading hours before the crossing, Albrecht summoned Elise to the same barn he used for briefings. The walls smelled of hay and oil. Frost traced every board. He handed her a bundle of documents, wounded lists, foreign names, and files stamped, confidential. His voice cracked when he said, "If they come, burn these. Then go east." Elise frowned. "And the villagers?" "That's no longer a concern." Something inside her tightened. "They are my concern," she said quietly. Albrecht looked at her long enough to see defiance where he used to see obedience. It almost made him smile. Almost. When she left, she hid one folder beneath her coat, a thin record of captured Allied medics. Among the sheets was a name she couldn't place: Aaron Keaton. She traced the letters with her thumb, unsure why she didn't destroy it. Outside, the night wind carried smoke from the bridges already burning upstream. She walked home clutching the file as though it were proof the world still had strangers worth remembering. Duty told her to burn it. Conscience told her to keep it. She obeyed the wrong order, the same mistake that would one day save her life. The fog was thick enough to taste. Every sound felt dangerous, even breathing. Keaton crouched at the riverbank, whispering to his squad to keep low. The boats slid into the water, pushed by hands trembling more from cold than fear. The current was slow but heavy, like something alive beneath the surface. Oars dipped, rose, dipped again. No one spoke. The only rhythm came from water striking wood. Halfway across, Keaton saw faint shapes ahead: graves, crosses, remnants of bombed farms. The far shore looked peaceful, but that kind of peace never meant safety in war. Every dark patch of land could hide rifles. He thought of what Patton had said before they left camp: hesitation kills faster than bullets. So they kept moving. The church bells began faintly somewhere inland, ringing through the fog. It was a sound that didn't belong, a sound too calm for this hour. It felt like a warning. When the first man's boots touched the opposite bank, everyone froze again. Nothing moved. No gunfire, no shouting. Keaton stepped forward, rifle raised. The village ahead lay broken, smoke curling from forgotten chimneys. He whispered, "We're in." Some smiled, others just stared, unsure whether to fear or celebrate. The Rhine was behind them now, the water that was supposed to stop them had simply let them through. Would you trust silence more than orders? Drop a comment and let me know what you'd have done that night. In the morning haze, the road west from Mainz was a line of wagons, trucks, and dragging boots. Elise walked beside a young soldier whose arm she had stitched the day before. He kept asking whether the Americans truly crossed the river. She didn't answer. The truth changed faster than rumors. At the crossroads, fleeing troops tossed rifles into ditches. One shouted that the Rhine had fallen, but no one wanted to hear it. The bridge south of town still burned, black smoke rolling over the rooftops. In the square, Elise bandaged a child struck by shrapnel. A woman watching her whispered the name Albrecht, saying he'd ordered the retreat too late. Some called him coward, others mourned him. Elise said nothing, but the words cut into her. That evening, the last truck she'd been ordered to board drove east without her. She stood on the street until it vanished into smoke. For the first time since the war began, she couldn't tell whether running or staying would save anyone. When night came, sirens wailed again, though no bombers passed overhead. The noise only made her lonelier. Every sound reminded her she hadn't left, and couldn't. What would you have chosen? Duty, or the people left standing in the ruins? The farmhouse looked untouched from a distance, smoke rising softly from its chimney. Up close, it was empty. The walls were cracked, and the air stank of burnt paper. Keaton stepped inside first. On the table lay scattered belongings, children's drawings, half-eaten bread, a framed photo turned face down. The floor was slick with mud from retreating boots. His men searched the rooms quietly. One found a pile of half-burned letters near the stove. Keaton picked one up. The paper was damp, the ink streaked but readable. It carried the name Elise Weber at the bottom. He folded it and slipped it into his chest pocket without a word. Outside, fog swallowed the yard. Distant rumbling came from tanks crossing the pontoon bridge miles behind them. The Rhine crossing had become real, not rumor, not luck. They were deep inside Germany now, surrounded by silence too wide to trust. Private Harris cracked a nervous joke about ghosts keeping the place warm. Nobody laughed. Keaton looked back at the house once before leaving, knowing the letter in his pocket belonged to someone still on this side of the war. Was she alive? Was she the enemy? The question followed him long after the smoke faded into the trees. By the time word reached Mainz, it was already too late. The message was whispered by soldiers, repeated by refugees, "General Albrecht is dead." Elise didn't believe it until she saw the barn herself. The doors hung open, the horses gone, the inside still smelling of kerosene. His radio lay shattered on the ground, papers scattered across the floor. On the table, his note, her name written at the bottom. She read the line again and again, "Forgive me for silence." The words felt heavier than the war itself. Outside, the sky rumbled as Allied shells began to fall on the outskirts. Elise covered her ears, dropped the letter, and ran. She didn't know where to go. East meant danger, west meant the unknown. Her white uniform made her a target, but so did changing sides. She found cover near a half-collapsed wall, the noise shaking her bones. Across the river, flashes lit the clouds red. She imagined Albrecht watching from above, his loyalty turned to nothing but dust. Somewhere among the explosions, she swore she heard his voice again, not blaming her, not pleading, only tired. She pressed her hands to her face and whispered, "No more silence." They said generals died for glory. But this one died because there was nothing left worth commanding. Would you have judged him, or pitied him? Comment below. Days later, the city of Mainz was a grey maze of collapsed streets and hollowed churches. Keaton's platoon moved through in cautious silence, rifles high, boots crunching on broken glass. Inside one church, they found a small group of civilians gathered behind the altar, shivering beside a shattered statue. A woman knelt among them. Face pale, hands bandaged, eyes fixed on the child she was holding. Elise Weber. The MPs moved in first. "Check her papers," one barked. She didn't have any. A soldier pointed a gun at her, calling her a spy. Keaton recognized the handwriting on a piece of cloth tied to her bag, the same looping E from the burned letter. He stepped forward. "She's not an enemy," he said. The MPs hesitated. His sergeant pulled him back, muttering about orders and court-martials. Still, Keaton refused. "She saved them," he said louder, nodding toward the civilians. The standoff lasted seconds, maybe years. Finally, the MPs backed down, but the damage was done, his defiance was noted. Elise met his eyes only once before looking away, silent. Outside, rain began to fall again through the holes in the roof, dripping onto ruined hymn books and the cracked marble floor. No one in that room knew whether mercy or mistake had just taken place. And that, in war, is what makes all the difference. The church encounter did not end at the door. By nightfall, Elise sat under a single bare bulb in a makeshift office, hands tied, coat taken, eyes fixed on the cracks in the floor. Across from her, a U.S. intelligence officer flipped through reports that painted her as something she had never been, a helper of German command, a hidden link to Albrecht. He slid a folder toward her. "You were at his post. You handled his papers. You stayed when others ran. Why?" She stayed silent. Words, she had learned, could be twisted. Silence was harder to use as a weapon, even if it hurt more. In another tent, Keaton faced his own questions. A major leaned over the table and slammed his hand down. "You vouched for a woman with no papers in enemy territory. This isn't charity work, Lieutenant. This is war." The threat was clear: demotion, loss of command, maybe worse. Doubt slid into Keaton's mind for the first time. What if he had read her wrong? What if mercy had put his men at risk? Later, they were brought into the same room. Elise finally moved, only to place a folded note on the table, Albrecht's final words, stained in brown. She did not beg. She did not explain. Keaton read the name at the bottom and felt the weight of a dead general's guilt settle on them both. Would you have trusted her, or walked away to save yourself? Spring rain swept over the valley as Patton's armor pushed east. The roads were clogged with tanks, trucks, and lines of refugees stumbling between them. To clear a path, command ordered a small patrol to secure a narrow bridge over a side river. Keaton was chosen to lead it. Elise had no choice. She had been reassigned as a translator for displaced civilians, riding in the last truck of the column. When she saw Keaton at the head of the patrol, he looked older than the week before, as if each hour since the church had carved another line into his face. The bridge was a simple stone span, worn by years of quiet use. On one side stood American rifles and engines. On the other, scattered locals clutching what little they had left. Children cried without tears left to shed. Halfway across, the first shot cracked the air. A hidden German gun opened up from the tree line. The bridge shook as shells hit the riverbank, throwing up fountains of water and stone. One blast tore a hole in the middle of the span. A truck lurched sideways, hanging half over the edge. Inside, a boy screamed. Keaton yelled for everyone to fall back. But Elise ran forward. She crawled along the broken edge, fingers gripping slick stone, body exposed to fire. She reached the boy, cut his seat strap with shaking hands, and pushed him toward the American side. For a moment, all sound dropped out, just rushing water and her own pulse. Then the bridge gave a long, low groan. If you watched her crawl through that chaos, would you still call her the enemy? News of the bridge incident spread through the command post faster than any written report. The boy lived. So did most of the patrol. But Keaton had ignored a direct order to withdraw until every last civilian was off the span. By dusk, he was in a small wooden shack with bars on the window. No formal trial yet, just a promise that one was coming. He sat on the narrow bunk, mud still on his boots, listening to trucks roll past outside, heading further into Germany. Elise, bruised and exhausted, had been sent to a field hospital near the camp. She walked the rows of cots in a daze, tending both German and American wounded. To her, bodies were no longer uniforms, just people who bled the same. Still, nurses whispered that she was the German who made an officer lose his head. Later that night, a guard let her stand by Keaton's cell. They spoke through the bars, their faces lit only by a lantern down the hall. "I'm the reason you're in there," she said quietly. "No," he answered. "I'm here because I chose not to walk past you." He told her something then that he almost wished he could take back. In war, loud men win medals, but it is the quiet ones who carry the real weight. Would you risk your career for one person you barely knew? The air raid started just before sunrise. Sirens wailed, then cut out as the first explosions landed beyond the camp fence. The ground shook. Dust fell from the ceiling of Keaton's cell. Spotlights swung across the sky, catching the bellies of low-flying bombers. Somewhere near the hospital tents, someone screamed for help. A blast tore through the side of the stockade, splintering wood, throwing Keaton to the floor. When he stood, the door to his cell hung cracked on one hinge. Smoke poured through the hallway. He could have run. Instead, he grabbed the nearest stunned guard by the shoulder and pulled him outside. Across the yard, the hospital tents were on fire. Flames climbed the canvas like they had been waiting for this chance. Elise was inside, helping move the wounded. A support beam crashed down, pinning 2 medics and blocking the exit. Keaton pushed through the smoke, eyes burning, lungs on fire. He heard Elise shouting, trying to lift the beam alone. Together, they heaved it up just enough for the men to crawl free. The roof sagged, heat pushing them back. One more second inside and the whole place would have come down on their heads. They stumbled out as another blast lit the horizon. For a brief moment, everything went still. No shouting, no engines, just the distant thump of bombs and the crackle of fire. Then a runner arrived, breathless, holding a folded message. "It's over," he said. "Germany has surrendered." The words felt unreal, almost rude in the middle of so much wreckage. Keaton looked at Elise, faces streaked with soot and sweat. The war that had dragged them together was ending, but the scars it left in them were just beginning to show. If you're still watching, hit like if you think survival is only the start of the real battle. Months later, the Rhine flowed calm under a pale autumn sky. The bridge at Oppenheim had been rebuilt, stronger, wider, lined with fresh railings that still smelled of new paint. Aaron Keaton stood at the center, a small box in his hand. Inside lay his medals, the ones pinned on him for courage under fire and exemplary conduct. He turned one over between his fingers, thinking of the night crossing, the empty farmhouse, the barn where a general died for an oath no one would remember. On the far bank, children played near the water's edge. They skipped stones across the surface of the same river that had once been promised as a grave. Now it was just a river again, cold, deep, uncaring. Far to the south, in a Red Cross hospital in Bavaria, Elise Weber sat at a small table and wrote a letter. She thanked Keaton for not walking past her in the church, for believing in her when it cost him more than she had known. At the end she wrote, "Forgive the silence. Some things I still cannot say." The letter crossed borders, passed from office to office, then vanished into the clutter of peace, misfiled, misplaced, never delivered. On the bridge, Keaton opened his hand and let one medal drop into the Rhine. It hit the water without a sound he could hear, swallowed by the current that had already taken so much. He did not know a letter with his name on it was drifting somewhere in the quiet after war. Subscribe if you want to hear what happened the next time fate brought two strangers back to the same river.